Okay, we're going live.
Welcome back to the Nexus 2025 Interdisciplinary Conference. We will get started in about 30 seconds while we start preparing on the back end. We are entering session number 3. To let you all know, this conference is being live streamed on YouTube and archived there. So if you have unfortunately missed the first and second sessions, which were wonderful, they are recorded, as is this and future ones as well. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that we have a few presentations in this session that are going to be video. So the production technology team in the background will be monitoring and loading those uh, while we go. So welcome back. I'm Dr. Joel Domingo. I'm one of the conference team members bringing you the Nexus Interdisciplinary Conference here, our inaugural one. We've had great sessions so far. Good afternoon, good evening, and to some, good morning. This is a great conference that we look forward to continuing on in perpetuity. With this is session 3 on resilience and well-being. Presenters will have 15 minutes to present, followed by a period of Q&A thereafter. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and kick this off and welcome our first presenter, Dr. Jackie Linder, who will present. And Dr. Linder, please take it away. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Dominguez. My audio okay? My sound coming through all right? Yes, I
Yes, it
think
is.
that's
Thank
good.
you.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so welcome everyone to my talk on resilience and the performance of self. If anybody had the opportunity or the time to read my bio, you will know that I am a clinical psychologist and I specialize in the treatment of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I do a lot of stuff, academic stuff in university and administrative stuff, but I am also still a practicing clinician. My area of specialization is complex trauma, and I have a subspecialization in the psychological profiling of survivors of human trafficking. I do a lot of work in the realm of interpersonal violence, as well as working with first responders, military, police, EMS, and firefighters. The talk that I want to do today is around the concept of the performance of self. So something that I should share with you first is I am a very, very old school psychodynamic therapist. We're really out of fashion in the West, in North America, we see a very, very strong trend in the direction of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is described as an evidence-based treatment. And it is an evidence-based treatment in the sense that we have taken the time to study it and measure it, and therefore we have evidence about it. It is not the only effective treatment, and it is not the most effective treatment at all, not by a long measure, when it comes to psychological complex trauma. And the difference between complex trauma and what we would call, I don't like the phrase simple trauma, but simple trauma essentially, or type 1 trauma, is like a car accident, a mugging, an assault, something like that. It is a single incident event. It is limited in time. You can clearly articulate what happened. You can remember what happened, and you can work on what happened. Complex trauma is not like that at all. Complex trauma is metaphorically the equivalent of a 50-legged bench. It is huge. It is overlapping. It is very, very messy. It is all over the place. And in almost every case, because complex trauma is rooted in human development early in childhood in terms of adverse childhood experiences, it touches every aspect of a human being's life, in particular their identity development and their sense of self. So let's begin with the concept of trauma and shame. There is a very strong link between complex trauma and shame, possibly because complex trauma is regularly and typically experienced in childhood. And one of the great challenges of being a child who was abused or neglected is that experience gets internalized. It means that often, more often than not, when a child is being harmed, they will more often than not blame themselves as opposed to their perpetrator. And there's very, very good empirical evidence to support that. So, why that matters in the context of shame is when a child internalizes being beaten, being harmed, being neglected, being molested, one of the things that they will likely say is, it's all my fault. And then immediately following that, I must have deserved it. So the internalizing of the trauma is rooted in the child's belief that they did something to deserve being battered, assaulted, and injured. It's their fault. And so children in childlike language will say things like, I'm bad, I'm a bad kid. It's something they'll feel quite often. They will feel like there's something wrong with them. And quite often, their perpetrator and the people around their perpetrator will, in fact, have the child positioned as what we call the identified patient in family therapy. So the child is scapegoated and they carry the weight and the burden of the entire family system psychopathology because the child is either imploding by self-harming or, attempting to injure themselves or commit suicide or something like that, or they are exploding. Their symptoms are explosive, and in that context, they are aggressive, they are violent, they are saying terrible things to their siblings and their parents and their family members and so on. In both cases, the child is being blamed for the pathology that is going on in the family system. Not every family functions this way, but many, many families do. So we need to think about, what is shame for? Where does it come from? Why do we have it? Why do human beings even experience it? And the answer is that shame is a hardwired emotion. It may well have come from and developed in terms of human evolution as a form of self-regulation for a social species. Human beings are a social species. 100,000 years ago, we lived in small bands. We did not have police forces. We did not have military. We did not have governments quite often, except perhaps a head wise woman and a head wise man. Generally speaking, people lived in large, fluid family groups, typically no more than about 20, 22 people, and they had to manage their relationships in that context. And one of the things that helped them do that is the ability to feel shame. So shame can be adaptive if we are feeling bad about an antisocial action that we have taken. That is not the same as feeling bad about who we are. So when we're thinking about shame in the context of psychological trauma, we're not ashamed because we stole our brother's cookies. We're ashamed because somebody has hurt us and we feel like we deserve it, because why else would they hurt us? And why wouldn't anyone protect us? And therefore, we must be very, very bad children. And that kind of shame is incredibly dangerous to mental well-being. So while shame in general, from an evolutionary perspective, seems to have evolved to drive pro-social conduct because it's a very uncomfortable emotion. If I don't want to feel shamed, I don't do things that make me ashamed. If I'm living in a small community, I don't steal my neighbor's food because I might get caught and may be shamed and shunned by my group. And because human beings are physically small, we are physically smaller than most major predators, most major animal predators out there in the world. It does matter. Our survival and our ability to belong and be part of a group matters in terms of our survival. So if I am shamed, if I do something antisocial, I steal my neighbor's food and I'm caught by my neighbor will then tell everyone in the group what I have done. I will be ashamed. They will shun me, and they may force me to leave the group and try and survive in the wilderness by myself. At that point, my chances of survival are very, very small. So not only is the emotion of shame aversive, but it leads to a bunch of other actions that may become life-threatening. So the capacity to feel shame at all seems to be a way for human beings to regulate themselves and their conduct in the context of small groups. That's not too bad. However, shame can metastasize, and it does metastasize in trauma survivors. So the shame of what I have done becomes the shame of who I am as a being in the world, in my home, in my family, in my community, in the universe. I am somebody, I am my mother's child, I am my sibling's sister, etc., turns into self-talk, very, very toxic self-talk, like I am worthless, I am unwanted, I am useless. And we sometimes see in families that are struggling in terms of their communication that the primary caregivers and the secondary caregivers repeat those messages to the child. Why aren't you like your sister? Why aren't you more like your brother? What's wrong with you? I recently was in a session with a client, and he was disclosing to me that his father had stormed into his bedroom and started yelling at him because he had stayed up very late and was very loud and had woken the father up in the middle of the night. And the dad has a very, very busy job. He was tired, he was angry, but he didn't say to his son, please don't turn your music up loud at 2 o'clock in the morning in this house because I really need to sleep to pay the bills. What the dad said was, you are useless, you are lazy, you are incompetent. So it is no surprise to anyone that the work that I'm doing with this particular client is specifically focused on helping him improve self-esteem and find a sense of self that is not saturated in feelings of being unworthy or shameful. So the problem with shame when it's internalized is it creates a spiral of self-contempt. And in my clinical experience, I've been a clinician for a very, very long time. And I have worked with people with all kinds of diagnosis. And in my clinical experience, the most persistent psychological injury I work with in the field of trauma is self-hatred, self-loathing, self-contempt. This is the secret thing that sits at the center of the psychological injury. And the problem is that the identity, the sense of self, the self schema, if you're interested in cognitive therapy, grows around this self contempt and self hatred so that the core of the being and their feeling, this is not just a cognition, this is a fully embodied sense. The core of their being is that they are worthless and unlovable. And it is a secret. So I have worked with many, many seemingly high functioning clients. They have very, very senior jobs. They are gifted. They are employed. They are financially stable. They are married. They are parents. They are educated. And they absolutely hate themselves. And the reason is because of the shame that is at the core of their self system and their identity structure. So, what it's like on the inside, it's one of the great privileges of being a practicing clinician. I know there are several clinicians in this conference, is
3 minutes,
we
Dr.
are
Linder.
given the privilege of knowing the inner life and the inner world of the client. And on the inside, there, despite their apparent success, what's there is emptiness, disconnectedness, lots and lots of self-harm, withdrawal, mistrust, people-pleasing behavior, mood disorders, perfectionism, persistent anxiety. Why? Because they're not good enough to just be loved on their own. And so what that leads to is the performance of self. And in some cases, the performance of self is so significant that it shows up as psychological dissociation. So depersonalization is when the person who is in that body does not feel a sense of connection emotionally or cognitively to that body. There is a distance, a perceptual distance and an emotional distance between the person and their sense of self. And we do know that that is rooted in physical changes in the brain. We know that there's derealization. That population will often look out at the world, look at the people in the room, at the people in the conference, and feel an unusual sense of disconnect from them. So they are in a space, they're proximal to the people in the room, but they don't feel like they're in the same bubble. There's a disconnection and a separation. They feel detached from the world around them. They feel numb. They feel like they're losing time. They feel unreal. And so in most cases, we talk about dissociation of the performance of selves in a pathological sense. I want to offer that for your consideration, that psychological dissociation and performance of self is actually an adaptive form of resilience. It is a survival strategy for people who have been injured and are having to fake it until they can make it. This is a classical phrase from the 12-step program for anybody who works with people who do 12-step work and are struggling with addiction. Sometimes when you can't access authenticity, you just pretend you're okay and you hope for the best. So through that process, one of the ways to shift from faking it to making it is self-compassion. It is the ability to start caring for, first noticing and then caring for the wounded child within us that is the source of our authentic self connection. And that self connection cannot be given to us by other people. We have to find it within our own self and within our own soul. So I leave you with the words of Sharon Salzberg. Resilience is based on compassion for ourselves as well as compassion for others. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Linder. That was wonderful. It was very hopeful on a very heavy subject. So thank you very much for that. Our next presenter is going to be talking about building resilience after client suicide, a three-phase framework for post-vention supervision. And this is a video which we will load up in queue. And so please give your attention to the video and we will begin. Make sure the sound is on from our production team. Not hearing sound yet coming through. We'll go ahead and cue that up as we prepare on the queue. We will.
Hello, and thank you for joining me for this session. My name is Dr. Heidi Nicolo, and today I'll be sharing Building Resilience After Client Suicide, a three-phase framework for post-vention supervision. This topic sits at the intersection of trauma, ethics, and resilience in our field, and I hope you'll find it valuable. This work grew out of my own lived experience, my passion for reflective practice, and the recognition that while we do a really good job preparing mental health professionals to assess and respond to suicide risk, we often do very little to support them after a client's death has occurred. For many practitioners, this is one of the most profound personal and professional challenges they'll face in their entire career. And yet, in supervision and in organizational response, it's still largely under-examined, and in many settings, it can actually be avoided. My framework was created to bring structure, safety, and reflection to that space, to help practitioners and supervisors navigate the aftermath with compassion and containment and professional growth. As mentioned, client suicide is one of the hardest experiences a mental health professional can face in their career. It truly shakes our confidence, our sense of competence, and even our connection to the work. Many clinicians have described this experience as isolating, feelings of shame, and just an uncertainty of where to return. This is where supervision can make a huge difference. A thoughtful, structured postvention process can really help restore a sense of safety and belonging. It also can help clinicians process what happened in a way that supports both healing and learning. So this work really matters because it's about protecting the people who do the work, our colleagues, our supervisees, and ultimately our community of practitioners. Even though we know that supervision is a cornerstone of clinical practice, most supervisors haven't been trained in how to respond after a client suicide. What often happens is avoidance. People mean well, but they don't know what to say, or they worry about making things worse. Some supervision turns into risk management or documentation cleanup instead of being a space for care and reflection. Other times, supervisors feel just as shaken as their supervisees. That gap between what's needed and what actually happens is where harm can actually be done. And that's why a structured framework is so important. It gives us a roadmap when emotions and systems are at their most fragile. When we think about postvention supervision, it really needs to be grounded in three key concepts and theories. First, trauma-informed practice. After a client's suicide, both the supervisee and the supervisor can be affected. So our starting point has to be safety. Emotional, relational, and systemic safety are most important. It's about slowing things down, avoiding re-traumatization, and offering choice and transparency in the process. Second, reflective supervision. This isn't about performance review or fact-finding. Instead, it's about creating a safe place to think out loud, to explore what happened, how it impacted the clinician, and what it means for their identity as a practitioner. And third, resilience theory. I see resilience not as bouncing back, but as connection, meaning making, and adapting with support. When supervision brings these three things together, safety, reflection, and connection, it becomes a healing process, not just a physical task to check a box. My three-phase framework gives supervisors a simple, flexible structure to follow. Phase 1 is about stabilization. This involves grounding, emotion regulation, and practical containment strategies. In Phase 2, it's about reflection, helping the clinician explore meaning, identity, and any ethical or cultural considerations that are coming up. And in Phase 3, it's about integration. Here we focus on recovery, reconnection, and professional growth. This framework isn't rigid. Clinicians move back and forth between phases depending on how they're coping and what supports they need. But the structure itself offers a sense of safety and predictability in the process. And this is something that's often missing in the aftermath of a loss. Phase 1 is all about stabilization. When a client's suicide occurs, the immediate instinct in many organizations is to shift into investigation, liability, or case review. But for the counselor survivor, this can feel re-traumatizing. Supervision at this stage should focus on containment, helping the clinician feel grounded, safe, and supported, not alone. That means normalizing the grief, acknowledging the complexity of emotions, and creating space where their experience can be validated without judgment. We also clarify immediate needs here, checking in about practical needs, workload, and who else is in their support system. At this stage, it isn't about analyzing what went wrong. It's about creating stability so the clinician can begin to process what happened. This phase is all about creating safety and stabilization, not just for the supervisee, but also for the supervisor. In the early aftermath of a client's suicide, we're not analyzing, we're grounding. And some practical strategies that might be helpful here include starting supervision with a brief grounding or check-in exercise, naming what's present in the room, whether it might be an emotion or silence or even just uncertainty, clarifying the structure and expectations to create predictability for what comes next. The goal here is to restore a sense of safety before moving into deeper reflection. Once stabilization has been established, we can move into meaning making. This is where supervision shifts from immediate containment towards reflective processing. Clinicians often wrestle with what if questions. What if I'd done something different? What if I'd missed a warning sign? In supervision, these thoughts can be safely unpacked rather than pushed down or ignored. We also work with countertransference here, those personal, emotional responses that often surface in the aftermath of a client's suicide. This is a crucial part of helping the clinician process both grief and professional identity questions. Here we integrate reflective and developmental models of supervision. We don't just problem solve, instead we foster insight, helping the clinician reshape their narrative and supporting them in moving towards resilience. Once the clinician is feeling a bit more grounded, we can move into that reflective space. This is where we ask gentle, guided questions, not to dissect the event, but to help them find meaning in it. For example, I might ask, how has this experience shaped the way you see yourself as a therapist? What feels hardest to hold right now? What are you learning about your values or your boundaries through this? And what role did the system, policies, culture, workload play in this situation? Reflection helps transform guilt or confusion into understanding and self-compassion. It's also where learning starts to take root, both personally and professionally. Final phase is about integrating the experience, helping the clinician reconnect with their professional identity and confidence. Here we might explore questions like, what's one thing you want to carry forward from this experience? Or what would help you feel reconnected to your work and your community or team? This is also a stage where we can start looking at prevention. What system changes or supports might be needed next time? Maybe it's clearer policies or better access to debriefing. The message here is that growth is possible. Recovery doesn't mean forgetting that it happened. It means integrating the loss into a renewed sense of purpose and connection to the work. So this framework is really about resilience, but not the kind that we sometimes oversimplify as bouncing back. It's about personal resilience, which is about self-regulation and meaning making. Relational resilience, which is about connection, having people who can hold space and walk with us through the uncertainty. And of course, systemic resilience is about the structures that either support or undermine the process. What policies, leadership, workload, and communication look like. When supervision intentionally supports all three layers of resilience, we start to shift from seeing postvention as damage control to seeing it as prevention. Supporting one clinician well after a loss can strengthen the whole system or organization. And so this work has big implications for both supervisors and organizations. For supervisors, it means developing postvention skills, those skills that involve grounding, reflective inquiry, and cultural responsiveness. It's also about modeling emotional honesty, vulnerability, and self-awareness in supervision sessions. For organizations, it means building clear policies and pathways for postvention. Who reaches out? What supports are offered? What language is used in communication? These details shape how safe people feel to show up authentically and vulnerably. And finally, it's about culture, creating environments where vulnerability isn't seen as a weakness, but as a part of ethical, resilient practice. When organizations invest in supervision as a form of care, everyone benefits: staff, clients, and the broader community of mental health professionals. In closing, the three-phase framework for postvention supervision is ultimately about creating a culture of safety, reflection, and professional growth. It helps supervisors respond not just to a single event, but to the ripple effects that follow across people, teams, and systems as a whole. If we can learn to meet these moments with structure, compassion, and courage, we're not only reducing harm, I really believe that we're strengthening the fabric of our profession, because postvention, when done well, is a form of prevention. I'll leave you with this thought. Resilience isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning, adapting, and growing through it. By integrating reflective practice and supervision, ongoing education, and systemic support, we can ensure that no counselor survivor navigates this experience alone. When we show up well after a client's suicide, we don't just respond to a crisis. We strengthen the foundation that our profession is built on. We remind clinicians that they are not alone, that their worth isn't defined by outcomes, and that healing is possible through connection and reflective practice. Supervision can become a place of restoration, not just evaluation. And in doing so, it helps us build a culture of care that endures beyond a single event. Thank you for being part of that shift. One conversation, one supervision session, and one act of compassion at a time.
Wonderful. I want to go on record to thank Dr. Nachillo for this um, profound presentation. All right, we'll turn our attention to the next presenter, which is going to be another video. And the title is Examining the Impact of Internal Family Systems on Trauma Recovery, a Counseling Perspective. We'll go ahead and cue this up and get started. While we're waiting for
Dr.
this.
Domingo, is the audio coming through?
The audio is not coming through yet. We're going to go ahead and cue this up. And as we do, this is a presentation on how internal family systems therapy, IFS, supports those healing from post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD disrupts core aspects of the self, identity, and emotional regulation. So as we cue this video up from Lauren Brock, we'll go ahead and load this and prepare this for viewing. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to include them in the chat. We'll monitor those and address those after the presenters have gone. I know that there's one presenter who is unable to be here. So for those that are not here to answer your questions, you have their bio and their contact information, and I know you're more than welcome to contact them as well. We're going to go ahead and turn the volume up here and restart this.
I'm afraid that's as high as we can go in terms of audio. So what
Okay.
I'd like to propose is that we pause this presentation and ask Dr. Kalantar to take a turn, and we will try and sort out the tech issues with the sound, if that's okay.
All right, let's go ahead.
Yeah, I'm ready.
And move to the next one then. Let's go ahead and go to the next presentation.
So,
All right, please feel free to begin.
yeah. Hello, everyone. I appreciate that. Now I have that time to talk. I am Dr. Kalantar. I'm a clinical counselor, and I'm happy to be here talking about resilience and resistance together. And I've been as a professional practicing for over like 15 years, and my approach is kind of integrated, concentrating on a cultural sensitivity and, of course, humanistic approach, aligning with systemic perspective. And I would like to, at the beginning, to express my appreciation to those indigenous people who have cared for this land. I'm talking from here, from Canada, from Vancouver. And my background is like, it shows that how the nature is there. And then that's why I'm appreciating to those people who care for this land since time immemorial. So when I talk about resilience and resistance, I believe they are connected to each other. And I want to share with you and throw your attention that how resistance has a role for um, people, not specifically in our therapy sessions, in our therapy room, even in our communications, in our relationships, that people, because they want to protect themselves, maybe they want to have that kind of like defense mechanism to use resistance. And I want to highlight the fact that resistance can be a positive one in terms of just protecting themselves. That's why I want to share with you that from resistance to resilience in mental health, the cultural dimension of healing, highlighting that piece, which is the cultural one. And when I'm talking about that sentence, before to go there, uh, I want to share with you a poem from Rumi, Maulana Jalaluddin Balkhi. Um, as my mother language is like Farsi, I would go at the beginning and say Farsi salam. It means that hi, just I'm saying just now. So nothing in the universe is outside of you. Seek within yourself whatever you desire, for you are that. So when talking about resilience, we need to consider our strengths inside, and this is the one that typically I use when I see my clients and helping them. So the one that I have a kind of like simple model that you see from resistance to resilience. From my understanding, resistance can be led to resilience, but the cultural connection is something that we need to consider. And this is the one that I want to throw your attentions. If you see here, uh, when talking about that kind of resistance, typically people, whether in therapy room or in relationships, in their workplace, different areas, they have different things by themselves, is upbringing, experiences, values, community norms, spirituality, religion, all those things have a role. That's why they want to protect themselves. They want to consider their dignity. So when we talk about dignity, when we talk about self-protection, the first one can be something we call it resistance. Clients, people, uh, maybe they want to implement resistance to protect themselves. So if it's the case, if we can provide them with a safe space, I consider a kind of like cultural connection here. If we have cultural connection, like culturally connecting to our clients, to that people that we are communicating with them, maybe it can be a solution. Just I'm raising such a question here. Many people prefer to share their findings. I am raising such questions instead of like providing and sharing with you findings. Just I want to raise some questions and even welcome to share your perspective, please. What do you think about those questions that I'm raising here? Just how we can have that kind of cultural connection when we are talking about resistance. Just imagine uh, if we can be connected, we are assuming that if we can be connected culturally, the solution can happen. But how? So if you see here, whether in micro level or macro level. So we have things. So under client's dignity as a kind of self-protection, at least we have those two variables, like macro level, macro level, and under macro level is like about intersectionality, how we perceive ourselves and how we can be exposed in like microaggression, discrimination, or someone hurts us based on those forms of intersectionality that we have in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of cultural background, in terms of the level of education, or like in terms of the class that we are, like higher class, lower class, all those things that we have. So in that macro level, like maybe a kind of advocacy we talk about, but how we can implement it in order to have a cultural connection, in order to reassure people around us, loved ones around us, or in our therapy sessions, in order to reassure them that we don't want to attack their dignity. We want to help them to protect themselves appropriately. So we go like advocacy in macro level, but again, like again, going to empathy for micro level, like talking about vulnerability. I'm not talking about the other people being vulnerable with me as a counselor. I'm talking about myself as a clinical counselor, as a therapist, to be vulnerable with people, including my clients. Do you think if I be vulnerable with my clients, maybe it's like helping them to uh, switch from resistance to resilience? Considering that when we are talking about resistance, we are talking about how we can help them to make changes because they want to get support, they want to receive such services to make such a change because of some reason that they realize that they need to make change, but they don't feel safe to make changes. So you see the question, how can we make sure that both we and our clients feel that their dignity is being respected, acknowledged, and integrated into every aspect of the therapeutic relationship? So it's not easy to be vulnerable with clients as a clinical counselor, as a therapist, but just imagine if we implement that in the sense that helping them to reduce the level of that kind of self-protection, what will happen? So it's something that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking and I'm asking the question like to the audiences. So how we can help our clients to feel that dignity more than past in the therapy session. So again, cultural connection, how we can do that? Is it next to the fact that we want to use strengths for our clients, we want to highlight those strengths that they have, but next to that, how we can maximize cultural connection? It's not something that we can do that easily. Just imagine a person comes to us from different background, from different cultural aspect, or even in terms of the power dynamic that we have. It's not only marginalized people. For instance, I'm coming from a community that maybe I perceive myself a marginalized person from that community being here in Canada. So even in that part, I have my form intersectionality connecting to other person that they are from the dominant culture. At the same time, they feel that they have some vulnerability things that they want to share with me, but it's not easy for them. Although they are coming from the dominant culture, just imagine how it can be difficult. So uh, it's a big question that how we can help our clients to feel that they are connected culturally. This is the big one. Maybe different components next to those components that I talk about, maybe spirituality, maybe like upbringing, but still I'm trying to find other variables that helping our clients to feel that we are connected to each other. Even in our relationship with our colleagues, just imagine if you see colleague from different culture, different ethnicity, and that particular person talks even using one specific word from your own language. So how it works for you? How do you feel? Like you feel that you are connected? So even a small piece can help that kind of cultural connection. So it's still a lot to think about how we can maximize it. And from when we talk about from resistance to resilience, of course, we need to have that cultural connection to engage with our clients. And I am uh, raising such a question to all of you. How can we strengthen cultural connections so that we can touch the client's inner voice, guiding them gently from resistance toward resilience? So it's more than like empathy, it's more than advocacy. I'm assuming that there should be other keywords, there should be other things that we need to implement. Specifically, when we are talking about from like systemic lens of view, from systemic perspective, what would be all those things? And especially nowadays we acknowledge that how cultural piece is the significant one when we are communicating, we are talking with other people, whether in therapy sessions, in workplace. So having that cultural connection is something that we need to consider. So I'm happy that I ended my uh, presentation like I guess 3 minutes soon, and to just to save time as much as possible. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kalantar. That was wonderful. It's a great presentation, and
Yeah,
thank you for your flexibility in jumping in on this.
yeah.
All right, we are going to go ahead and go back to our third presenter, Lauren Michelle Brock, which is examining the impact of internal family systems on trauma recovery, a counseling perspective. Thank you to the technical production team for this, and we'll go ahead and get started as soon as that is queued up and ready. Once again, it is a video, so please feel free to contact Lauren should you have
Hey
questions
everyone.
as well.
My name is Lauren Brock, and I am a master's student in the Counseling Psychology program at City University on the Calgary campus. And I just wanted to begin by thanking Dr. Jackie Linder for accepting my work and presence at this conference. It means a lot to me, allowing to be able to contribute to the dialogue surrounding resilience in the contemporary world. So I want to just start by a show of hands in the room or in the Zoom space. How many of you have seen the movie Inside Out? If you haven't, I've heard there's a new anxiety part in Inside Out 2, basically just like me. So if you haven't seen it, you should. My topic is looking at how internal family systems heals PTSD. So just like in the movie Inside Out, if you have seen it, it's about different parts or ego states, simply put, emotions, and how they relate to one another. So each of us has our own inside out family or internal system inside us. It looks slightly different and sounds different inside us too. For those of you who aren't familiar with the movie and have no idea what I'm talking about, I'd like you to just take a moment. You can close your eyes if you'd like, and just imagine if each emotion you felt or heard in your mind was a character. The main character is you, your best self, the calm and content you. We call this the core self. Sometimes other characters speak louder. They might say, I wonder why all of these people are staring at me right now. How do I look on the Zoom camera? And I hope they like my slides because I hate listening to the sound of my own voice. These are what we call ego states, more simply parts that are speaking. They're actually not bad. They're just trying to help in their own specific way or style. Sometimes parts fight, just like family members do, or maybe do. And in this, you might feel a little alarmed or upset. So in IFS therapy, we help you, the calm, content core self, speak to the parts so everyone can feel safe again. IFS is basically helping all your inside characters feel heard, cared for, and understood. This can achieve internal harmony, which is the goal of therapy. So now moving on, trauma is how the brain responds to an event that is emotionally overwhelming to grasp. PTSD is a term under this umbrella, a mental health condition in response to the trauma, more focused on symptoms like flashbacks, so having really vivid emotional memories of the trauma, or dissociation, so not being present because the mind is constantly somewhere else, usually thinking about the trauma. PTSD is a term coined from those who were serving in war. And there's others like me who may confuse it with the process of public speaking. Healing is the process of recovering. Just like when a scab heals on your arm, you might feel a little uncomfortable at times, but the change and growth makes room for resilience and strength. Compassion is expressing warmth, comfort, and kindness to others. So with that in mind, I wanted to look at how we can use our own emotional systems with the guidance of a licensed therapist to become resilient and potentially heal from the trauma faced in our lives. So now you might ask yourself, well, how do we move from a space of experiencing PTSD through dissociation, lack of presence, flashbacks, and intense memories of horrific events playing over in my mind? How do we move from that to a place of resilience, healing, post-traumatic growth? Is that even possible? I argue that it is. And I think from what I understand, trauma exists systemically. So it makes sense to recover through a systemic process. So for example, we see PTSD occur cognitively, so through perception, dissociation, and memory, psychologically through identity, emotional regulation, neurobiologically, so emotional processing, genetics in the brain, and environmentally through community, culture, and we can see it in visible minorities too. Some key components of IFS that I wanted to mention, I think they're notable, is the theory it uses is systems thinking, examining the interrelated components and their interactions within the whole system rather than isolating individual parts. And the parts are ego states in this case. So it really looks at trauma as a system. So these ego states in internal family systems, they all have a role. They're either protective parts or the parts that are being protective. So they're called managers, firefighters, and exiles. So you can think of a manager like a good manager in the workplace. These are protective parts or subpersonalities that proactively try to maintain control over the internal and external environments to prevent emotional pain and vulnerability. Exiles are the parts that are protected. So the parts that carry the most emotional pain, fear, shame, or trauma from past experiences. And firefighters are ego states that emerge when exiles break out. Firefighters demand attention. They work to divert attention away from the exiles, usually through really impulsive or reactive behaviors such as overeating, substance use, or excessive working. So if you didn't know based on my explanation, managers and firefighters are the protective parts and exiles are the ones being protected. So some key findings and significance, just to summarize. I find it really interesting that in Canada and the US, there's actually no systems therapy that is certified to be used with veteran populations or military populations. It has a lot of, strength and reasons to use it because It's non-pathologizing, it addresses fragmentation, shame, and self-blame, which are core barriers to resilience. A unique addition to trauma therapy is the focus and relationships between shame, guilt, and self-compassion. So I'd just like to quickly check in with my audience again. Who in the room knows the difference between guilt and shame? And you can just raise your hand. And if you're shy, don't worry, this is recorded, so I can't call on you. Guilt is a sense of urgency, so to treat others differently, it's usually ingrained in social responsibility. Shame, on the other hand, is an emotion that criticizes you, usually paired with the same response from guilt. So say you didn't sit with someone at lunch, guilt might respond by saying, you know, maybe you should have sat with that person at lunch today. That would have been nice of you. And shame will respond to the same thing and it'll say, you know what, you're not a very nice person. You didn't sit with that person at lunch today. There's always that element of criticism and self-blame. And so what you want to do is engage in self-compassion. So I told you that compassion is kindness and love and expressing that to someone else. Self-compassion is doing exactly the same thing, but you're just applying it to yourself. So treating yourself like you would your best friend. Debunking myths about PTSD. So I also thought it was very interesting that a lot of people think that PTSD is anxiety-based, meaning that anxiety is at the core of PTSD and what triggers it, but that's actually not true. It typically stems from sadness, anger, or hurt. And one can infer that some of the hurt can be linked to shame. So knowing that exposure-based methods are typically used under the assumption of anxiety, it allows for other models to be used and introduced when that's not the case. So yeah, anxiety, there's a lot of exposure-based methods for PTSD, and then those clients don't end up getting helped because their PTSD is not surrounding anxiety. And then finally, just touching on resilience, post-traumatic growth, and the mechanisms of change, ZZisms. Yeah, so the post-traumatic growth model explores positive changes that occur from high crisis. And the key domains overlapping as a result of internal family systems and post-traumatic growth are appreciation of life, relating to others, experiencing new possibilities, and spiritual or existential change. So we do this by reorganizing the internal systems, improving emotional regulation, and enabling adaptive coping for the client. And so just touching on future research and clinical practice now. So I noticed a lot of the literature when I was doing this project is focused on what we call the medical model, meaning it's focused on what's wrong with you, essentially. Like it focuses on symptoms and the types of trauma rather than what actually helps people and would get them to recover. I think there should be more of a focus on recovery. Cross-cultural application, so for those that think ego states can exist collectively, it's very hard to apply the IFS model to those cultures, and there's room for future research to adapt. And then finally, a treatment protocol I think would be really helpful, especially based on my past points. What if we had like a mandatory, do we use exposure or not? And you have to assess for anxiety, and then utilizing self-compassion when shame is present. On this slide, I just have my research question again, and then just the objectives I think we could use. But I wanted to just briefly end with a call to action, using trauma-informed initiatives at a societal and an individual level. So when we come across someone that's struggling, just ask yourself, do you think you're being a safe person for them? Do you feel like you're being transparent, open, and honest with them? Are you collaborating with them and using language that resonates with them to help them? This is a takeaway from my presentation. Thank you, and please connect with me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Wonderful, and I want to go on the record again to say thank you to Lauren for that great presentation. There's a lot of great practical implications for that. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump to one more presentation that is done via video, and this is cyberbullying and adolescent development, psychological impacts, resilience, and implications for counseling psychology.
Thank you for coming to my presentation. My name is Harsimran, and I will be presenting on the topic cyberbullying and adolescent mental health. I used this topic for my capstone. So let's take a look at the table of content for this presentation. We will be covering what is cyberbullying, research questions and approach, adolescent critical developmental stage, prevalence, nature and context of cyberbullying, psychological and emotional impacts of cyberbullying, coping, resilience, and counseling implications. We will also go over a school intervention example and then discuss limitations, future directions, and conclusion. So let's take a look first at what is cyberbullying. As we all know, the teenagers vastly outnumber adults, and their usage of technologies like instant messaging and social networking platforms. Social networking sites are the most popular socializing device, mainly for teenagers, as they are tightly incorporated into everyday practices. And since they can serve as a medium for users to interact with each other without any challenge of time or distance, the extended use of social media by young adults has made cyberbullying a major problem. So what is cyberbullying? Cyberbullying is distinct from traditional bullying in ways that greatly increases its potential to cause harm. Online victimization is not bound by time or location, can occur anonymously, and frequently endures indefinitely due to the lasting nature of digital content. Humiliation, exclusion, and harassment that may have previously taken place privately among individuals can now be quickly shared with large audiences, causing severe impacts. These distinctive characteristics highlight why cyberbullying has emerged as a primary concern for scholars, teachers, guardians, and especially for counselors who directly assist young people dealing with its effects. Now we'll take a look at research questions and approach used for this capstone. So the research questions that were used are: what is the way in which teenagers encounter and deal with cyberbullying, and how does it affect their emotional and social connections? The focus is on comprehending their experiences, the strategies they utilize to cope, and overall impact on their mental health and social relationships. The methodological approach entailed a structured search for peer-reviewed articles, books, and academic reports published over the past 15 years, incorporating select foundational works for theoretical context. Example is Erikson's developmental theory. Criteria for selection focused on studies that examine both the psychological effects of cyberbullying and its significance for adolescent growth. The articles were characterized into 4 thematic groups that guided the organization of the literature review. The first one being adolescence as developmental phase, second, prevalence, characteristics, and context of bullying, cyberbullying, third, psychological and emotional effects, and fourth, coping strategies, resilience, and counseling implications. This thematic synthesis enabled the combination of empirical results, theoretical models, and practical counseling viewpoints. Now we'll take a look at the themes of the capstone. The first one is adolescence as critical developmental stage. Adolescence is generally acknowledged as one of the most dynamic and challenging phases of human development. It signifies a shift from childhood to adulthood characterized by significant biological, cognitive, emotional, and social transformations. In counseling psychology, recognizing adolescence as a distinct developmental phase is essential, since it is at this stage that susceptibility to experiences like cyberbullying become more pronounced. Teens who are in the process of developing emotional regulation and coping techniques may be particularly susceptible to these lasting forms of victimization. Youth are also engaged in exploring the question of identity. Who am I? A journey that encompasses blending personal values, social influences, culture, norms, and future goals. Cyberbullying can significantly affect this developmental stage. Being victimized online can result in emotions of rejection, embarrassment, and low self-esteem. Also, neurological studies have revealed that there are significant brain changes occurring during adolescence. The prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making and impulse regulation, continues to develop, whereas the limbic system, involved in emotional regulation, is particularly engaged as well. So within the realm of cyberbullying, these cognitive and emotional changes clarify why and how young individuals might undergo such profound feelings of victimization online. The executive functioning skills of adolescents, which are still developing, may limit their ability to handle these reactions effectively. Some individuals might react spontaneously, while some may absorb the experience of cyberbullying. The next theme is prevalence, nature, and context of cyberbullying. As discussed earlier, cyberbullying is not limited by time or location. Cyberbullying is not just unending, but also unavoidable. Worldwide research indicates that 15% to 35% of teenagers have faced cyberbullying as victims, whereas 10 to 20% admit to participating in cyberbullying activities themselves. In Canada, the occurrence reflects these worldwide patterns. Statistics Canada 2019 found that 1 in 5 teens reported facing cyberbullying, with girls being more likely than boys to experience online harassment. Likewise, the Public Health Agency of Canada 2023 discovered strong correlations between cyberbullying and deterioration in adolescent mental health, especially concerning self-esteem and life satisfaction. These statistics highlight that cyberbullying is not a minor concern, but a prevalent issue impacting millions of youth globally. Cyberbullying also impacts teenagers differently. Socio-cultural elements like gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and immigrant status affect both the susceptibility to victimization and the coping mechanisms adolescents employ when faced with online harassment. Studies indicate that cyberbullying trends are varied and intersect with wider social and cultural disparities, resulting in specific groups being more vulnerable. Research shows that girls are more prone than boys to experiencing cyberbullying, especially through relational means like exclusion, spreading rumors, or appearance-based harassment. In contrast, boys are more prone to participate in or encounter direct and aggressive types of online harassment, such as threats or physical intimidation. Adolescents from sexual and gender minorities are particularly at risk in online environments. A study conducted by COSEB revealed that LGBTQIA2S+ youth experience higher rates of homophobic and transphobic harassment, further compounding the minority stress for this already marginalized group. Next is the most important theme of this capstone, which is psychological and emotional impacts of cyberbullying. So these effects are not solely immediate, they can also lead to lasting psychological repercussions, influencing academic, social, and emotional paths. Studies consistently connect cyberbullying to heightened risks of depression, anxiety, diminished self-esteem, thoughts of suicide, and disrupted identity development. Depression is among the most reliably recorded effects of being a victim of cyberbullying. Teenagers who undergo frequent online bullying indicate increased feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and disengagement from everyday activities compared to their unaffected counterparts. Anxiety is another common and well-recorded consequence of being a victim of cyberbullying, often showing up as increased alertness, social isolation, and a lasting fear of online engagement. Adolescence is a time of profound identity development during which young individuals, contented with Erikson's 1968 theory, psychosocial challenge of answering who am I. Peer feedback, whether positive or negative, significantly influences adolescents' perception of self, rendering them especially responsive to social assessment. Individuals targeted by cyberbullying frequently express diminished self-esteem, commonly internalizing emotions of inadequacy, unattractiveness, or social unacceptability. And then one of the most concerning outcomes of cyberbullying is its significant link to self-harm and suicidal behavior. An expanding range of studies show a distinct connection between being a victim of cyberbullying and thoughts of suicide, suicide attempts, and non-suicidal self-harm. The feeling of despair is intensified by the lasting nature of online material, which can render embarrassment seem unchangeable and heighten hopelessness. And now, how do we overcome this? So we'll be talking about the last theme, which is coping, resilience, and counseling implications. Teenagers employ various coping mechanisms when encountering online bullying, such as avoidance, problem solving, or emotion-focused approaches. Then equally important are the protective elements that encompass teenagers, encouraging friendships among peers, caring and involved parenting, along with attentive school settings have all demonstrated the ability to lessen the harmful impacts of cyberbullying. Teenagers can use adaptive strategies, often involve obtaining social support, problem solving, or employing positive self-talk, which can help alleviate distress and promote resilience. And then peers can also serve as an essential protective function in mitigating the psychological and emotional effects of cyberbullying. Supportive friendships can lessen the impact of unfavorable mental health effects, aiding adolescents in preserving self-esteem and resilience despite experiencing victimization. Family support serves as a key protective element in mitigating the adverse effects of cyberbullying. Teenagers who indicate positive, open, and emotionally attentive relationships with their parents usually exhibit better coping abilities and experience fewer lasting mental health issues after being victimized. And then schools. Schools continue to play a crucial role in addressing and preventing cyberbullying, even though a significant portion of it takes place beyond school property. Since schools serve as an essential social settings for teenagers, they significantly influence peer culture, demonstrate positive social behavior, and foster safer environments. Policies that explicitly define cyberbullying, outline repercussions for offenders, and offer confidential and easily accessible reporting options have been demonstrated to enhance safety in school settings. Furthermore, extensive school-centered strategies such as anti-bullying initiatives, restorative justice approaches, peer support programs, and digital literacy education provide students with the resources to manage online engagements more securely and responsibly. Next, we will take a look at the school intervention example, which can be performed in any high school counseling room or a small counseling or a small classroom setting with 8 to 10 students. And it can be, the facilitators can be a school counselor, optionally joined by a peer mentor or a teacher who is trained in somatics. So the first one would be opening and safety grounding. The session starts with introductions and brief grounding activity. Second would be psychoeducation, understanding cyberbullying. The counselor presents essential ideas outlining cyberbullying, discussing its emotional and mental effects, normalizing reactions to stress like fear or anger. Third step would be emotional awareness and regulation of activities. Students participate in an emotion mapping activity to identify emotional and physical reactions to online disputes. Then would be peer connection and support dialogue. The counselor facilitates reflections on bystander actions, empathy, and peer accountability. And the last one would be strengths, reflection, and empowerment. In conclusion, every student recognizes a personal strength or coping mechanism that has aided them in handling online or social difficulties. So this is one kind of session, a single session planned to discuss with students among themselves. It could be one of the interventions that could be used by schools. Next would be the limitations of the project. Like any other project, this capstone has various limitations. The research solely relies on secondary analysis of existing literature rather than gathering primary data. And narrative review method enables the integration of diverse viewpoints, but it lacks the direct experiential richness that qualitative approaches, especially phenomenological studies, can offer. A significant portion of current studies on cyberbullying utilizes cross-sectional survey designs, which can identify associations but fail to determine causal relationships between cyberbullying and mental health. The available literature on post-traumatic growth after experiencing cyberbullying is still sparse. Studies investigating how teenagers rebuild meaning, empathy, or self-identity following victimization are limited. Directions for future research could include longitudinal studies to monitor developmental effects of cyberbullying into early adulthood. Then also literature emphasizes the need for more cultural and contextual variation in cyberbullying studies. Further investigation into protective factors and post-traumatic growth after experiencing cyberbullying is necessary. Policy and advocacy are crucial domains for future growth. Counseling psychologists can significantly influence developmental of school and community policies that tackle cyberbullying, support mental health initiatives, and foster digital spaces. Together, the guidelines for research and practice correspond with counseling psychologists aimed to promote both personal healing and social justice with systemic change. And to conclude, this capstone project illustrates that cyberbullying is a complex and changing problem with significant developmental, psychological, and systemic consequences. The experiences of adolescents are influenced by peer relationships, parenting approaches, and school environments and cultural settings. For counselors, this necessitates stepping outside the therapy room to connect with families, schools, and communities in advocacy and prevention initiatives. This is in line with the broader dedication of counseling psychology to social justice. So that's everything for my capstone. And thank you so much for listening. For any questions, comments, and feedback, please email seikosim@cityuniversity.edu. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I hope you had something to take from it. Please do share your comments and feedback. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Wonderful. These are great and serious topics that deserve some deep introspection and reflection. And with that, we will have ample time for questions from the audience. I do want to also encourage you, should you want to type your questions in the chat, please feel free to do so. We shall be monitoring that. I certainly have lots of questions. I know we have two of the presenters here with us, so let me go ahead and jump in and open up the first round and set of questions to both Dr. Linder and Dr. Kalantar. Dr. Linder, I appreciate what you had to say about just this idea of developmental aspects to consider when looking at, resilience, and it reminds me of I was taught the Erikson stages of development, where if one does not certainly cross or fulfill certain aspects of those stages, it will show up in later life. Given what you mentioned, and there's a lot of talk in the child development world, I'm sure as you know, with adverse childhood experiences and how those experiences that affect our childhood will manifest themselves later on in life as well. Another presenter brought up the idea of the medical model of looking at deficits. So I wanted to ask a question and maybe some of your reflection on this idea of why is it that there's such a prevalence in looking at some of the ill effects of societal ills which lead to shame and such. And I'm glad we're ameliorating and finding ways to reduce it. But what can we do to turn some of this focus on a more pro-social and look at some of the strengths? Again, not diminishing the aspect that we need to look at some of these ill effects in order to address them. Absolutely. I don't want to diminish that. But how can we, in a greater sense, continue to push the narrative of let's not look at someone's deficit, let's look at their strength.
So I think first we have to start with the understanding that the trauma world is quite young compared to the medical world. So the field of traumatology started about 40 years ago. The co-founders were Dr. Judith Herman and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. They're still alive, and I know them both personally. That tells you how young the field is. In fact, Dr. Judith Herman has been a professional mentor of mine for about 15 years. I meet with her every month. So I think that part of becoming trauma informed is just getting to know the data, that are increasingly becoming available. So when Dr. Herman first published her book, we didn't know anything. In fact, she and Dr. van der Kolk became allies and the co-founders of the World Field of Traumatology because they were desperate psychiatrists in Boston, both drowning in the pathology of their patients as well as the social judgments around them. So he was working with veterans, she was working with survivors of intimate partner violence, and they were so desperate to get support, they went to each other and started basically a little lunch group, which turned into the World Field of Traumatology. And even in my career, so I've been working in the trauma field for about 20 years now, I have seen really in the last decade, maybe 15 years, an explosion of data. So first nobody heard about it, and then everybody was studying it. We do see that in terms of the world of academia. A topic is not, nobody's interested in the topic. Look at COVID. I mean, after COVID, the only thing people were publishing on was about pandemic stuff and mental health. So I think that part of the issue is that only specialists spend time exploring the literature of trauma. And so, if you have the time and the inclination to go down a rabbit hole and understand, come to understand that psychological dissociation, number one, is neurological. It is a real thing, it is not a fantasy. There are many therapists out there and psychiatrists who think that dissociation is not real, but we have very, very clear brain scans that show that there is a difference in the brain, in the physical brain of somebody who describes dissociative symptoms. But how many people take the time to familiarize themselves with that information? So I think part of it is that the trauma field is young. The medical field is very, very old. And in that field, remember that the medical field started sort of from the outside in. We did not have x-rays. We didn't have PET scans. We didn't have fMRI. We could only describe the observable symptoms and the observable behavior. So we really didn't know why anything was happening the way it was happening. And we built a medical system and a psychiatric system to manage that. As technology has advanced, we have a much, much, much better understanding of what's going on inside the box, inside the wiring. And from that, we have, I think, a more open, co-constructive, dignified, um, client-centered lens because we understand now something we did not know 40 years ago, which is that the symptoms and the behaviors are caused by the hardware itself. And so when somebody's experiencing dissociation and reporting dissociation and disconnected from their own bodies or the people around them and telling us that or trying to pretend that is not the case, it is actually a neurological situation that we are describing as a psychological situation.
Wonderful, wonderful, very thoughtful answer. And springboards me to Dr. Kalantar. Thank you again for your presentation. I appreciate what you had to say. And in fact, I was just continuing to reflect on both your presentation and your abstract, which one line in there stood out to me is turning the resilience, using cultural strengths and contexts to, turn resistance into resilience. And I'm curious in terms of perhaps more non-Western cultural contexts that this might be more apparent or even encouraged as the norm with your approach to healing and mental health.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Domingo, raising such a question, which is significant, like highlighting again the cultural piece. I appreciate that. Yeah, so when we consider like resilience and then how we can go from resistance to resilience, uh, it backs to the culture. If we are from the collectivistic culture or individualistic culture would be different. And it's interesting just now when you asked the first question, Dr. Linder, about strengths, how we can perceive like trauma strengths, if it's possible, right? And trauma. And then the answer that I got from like Dr. Linder is, okay, is trauma is like new word. It's like just young, like 40 years, not more than that. And I was thinking about is how it can be interesting to see that aspect of culture in the sense that many times when something happens in a specific culture, we don't perceive it as a trauma. However, if that one exactly happens to another culture, we may perceive it as a trauma. So having said that, I am observing that those who immigrated from one culture, let's put that way, collectivist culture, they didn't realize that they traumatized. And then when they come to another culture, like westernized culture, colonized culture, let's put that way, they realize that at the time they were traumatized and they didn't know that. So that's why, based on lots of research, we see that how immigrants they have more resilience when they compare with other people that they never immigrated. One factor they perceive is like immigrants people they have more resilience, which is wonderful that we see that findings and like connecting, integrating with the trauma and is the new word. I don't know, like, is it about how we can interpret the problem now when people they immigrate, they can interpret it properly, or they are re-traumatized again because now they see that what happened to them, or it's like they didn't have the language, they didn't have the term, they didn't have the keyword. Now they have that keyword, which is trauma. So there are different questions back to the first and the second question that you raised, Dr. Domenico. So I'm assuming that how we can even connect trauma to culture and then interpret trauma based on the culture again. And next to that, considering family of origin or community base when we want to interpret culture and trauma together.
Wow. Thank you. It's a lot to think of. Just this whole intersection of culture and trauma, and what does one culture say is trauma. They may not have the word, but certainly have that feeling and emotion, but not describe it. And are they re-traumatized, or are they just articulating it in the context by which it is expressed in that new culture? That's a great um, consideration. I know looks like we have a question here from Dr. Kariwo. Please feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. I got a question for Dr. Linda and another one for Dr. Kalanda. Starting with Dr. Linda, trauma, my understanding, is a very wide field. It's a huge field. So my question here is, you, because of the different types of trauma, how does one get to build resilience across them? I mean, are there different types of resilience? How does one work out the fact that there are different types of trauma are out there?
Mm. So I would say when we're thinking about the spectrum of trauma, there's four very large baskets that we can put trauma into.
Yeah.
One is type 1 trauma, single incident, car crash, mugging, assault, robbery, gunshot, something like that. So what's important to know about that is it is time limited and it's focused, and therefore treating it is in some ways very targeted. It's not easy, but
Mm.
it's clear. And then in the complex trauma case, everything's all over the place. There's 50 fires burning. And when you're working in the field of complex trauma, you're going in circles and corners and corkscrews and spirals. And then sometimes you're going in straight lines. Another category of trauma is attachment trauma, which is trauma in the context of childhood when the primary caregiver is the one who has injured the child. And why attachment trauma is even scarier than type 2 trauma is because it's like the pebble in the pond. So when trauma occurs in childhood, it starts to ripple out into every aspect of existence, behavioral, emotional, um, school, performance, employment, and so on. And it can ripple for the entire lifespan. So if there is not some kind of intervention when adverse childhood experiences happen and we have attachment trauma early in the game, maybe something terrible happened when I was 8, it absolutely is going to show up when I'm 50 if I don't do something about it. And then the last basket is vicarious trauma. This is in the context of frontline helpers, nurses, health professionals, psychologists, where we sit all day and we listen to the struggles of the world, the injuries and the pains of the world. And so we can be injured because we are social mammals. We can be injured by bearing deep emotional witness to the suffering of other people. But the common denominator is relationship. In all of the categories of trauma, which are legion, one of the things that holds true across all categories is that connection to other people, to trusted other people, is an absolute game changer when it comes to clinical outcome. So for first time single incident trauma, if you go home and you tell your family that something terrible has happened and you go to therapy and you have a good rapport with your therapist, there's a significant likelihood that you are going to get better and you will come through the traumatic experience and have resilience as the gift on the other side of your suffering. We were talking today, earlier today, about how resilience is the outcome of struggle, but you got to struggle in order to get it. The same is true in complex trauma. The difference between simple and complex trauma in terms of recovery is it takes much, much longer in the context of complex trauma, interpersonal violence, and so on, because there's just so much more to deal with. But if you have a good emotional bond with another person, relationship is a protective factor, absolutely, in terms of predicting a good outcome. And the same is true. We know in terms of development studies that it takes one single positive adult in the life of an at-risk child to show them the pathway to something besides the abuse and dysfunction of the system that they were raised in. That's another form of resilience, but you actually need the relationship intact in order to make that happen. And the same is also true with vicarious trauma. So in every study that we've done, the connection to other people, trusted, stable, safe people that create a secure bond for us, are the most important protective factor. It is why in most cultures in the world, we don't have psychologists, we don't have therapists, we don't have counselors. I grew up, my birth culture is Jamaica. And I grew up in a society where nobody has a therapist. Everybody has mental health issues, but nobody has a therapist. Nobody goes to therapy. They go to the bar or they go see their friends or they do something else. But what we do have in my birth culture is an immense sense of social cohesion. Everybody goes to church. Everybody gathers on the weekend and celebrates. I actually grew up half the time in a bar because my mother's best friend owned a bar, and so most of my developmental years were spent sitting in the lap of some grown up who was drinking rum and screaming across at the other grown up about local politics. But we sat in a circle together. And even though there was lots of psychopathology going on, lots of it, there was also lots of human connection. And we danced together and we sang together and we looked out for one another. And all of us needed mental health care, none of which was available, but we had each other. And that made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much, Dr. Linda. And for Dr. Kalanda, you talked about culture, and we have learned that we have to be cautious interpreting others' cultures. Now, here comes the problem. You had, I think, a solution where we need to move into cultural maximization. Now, if we don't know the other culture, how do we cross that bridge?
Yeah. Dr. Karivo, for such a question. Yeah, uh, is the difficulty is like that. Like when we don't know the culture, of course we go with the curiosity. We highlight curiosity from unknown position and curiosity we want to learn more about. That's why it's a dilemma. On one hand, we say that we need to have like cultural connection. On the other hand, we don't know them, right?
Right.
That's why we use such a keyword, curiosity or unknown position. I would consider again connection, just the connection, just the relationship. Just now you reminded me we have something from Erwin Yalom that I do have lots of respect for him, like psychiatrists and psychotherapists, American one, like novelist, and he has lots of like practical and fantastic books that he has. Somewhere he says that every problems come from the relationship, and also healing comes from the relationship. So, as much as we can connect properly to that person, client, colleagues, people, if we have better connection and relationship, gradually we will learn about them. And if we learn more about them, gradually we have more cultural connection to them. And of course, when we talk about cultural connection, we are not talking about 0, 1. We are talking about the scale, right? It's 1 to 10, for instance. So always we need to consider curiosity. Always we need to consider humility. Let's put that way: cultural humility and curiosity. That how they are important to know more about people. And next to that, when we're talking about the connection to other people, sometimes we need to learn about their culture, not from them directly, maybe participating in events, participating in, I don't know, like some gatherings related to that particular community, or even enjoying some, like, I don't know, like foods, music, all those things that they help us to learn more about the culture, watching some relevant movies about that particular culture. All those things can help us to have like better connection. Then if we have like cultural connection, if we are able to maximize it, so good things can happen. Just remembering that all things come from the relationship, whether issues or the solution.
Thank you so much. Mm.
All right, I'm monitoring the chat and seeing are there other questions from the audience or in the chat. If not, looks like there's one from Dr. Abby Nubla-Kung. Please go ahead and ask your
Sorry,
question.
Dr. Domingo. Did you have an if not? We're
I
taking a
do at
break
the
early.
end,
Oh
but please
no,
ask. Please feel free to ask your question.
I'm going to be that student. Actually, it's just more of a clarification, and also, and if what I think was said, then more of a I'd love to know a little bit more about it. But it's for Dr. Linder, who you there was a slide in there, and you had said for our consideration, is it that shame is a type of adaptive resilience?
I would say that how people who have deep core shame respond to that shame by performing self as
Mm,
opposed to being self
okay.
is highly adaptive, because it puts us in the category of the fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
Something happened to me, and the wheels fell off the bus, and I didn't get the good infusion early in the system that I needed, but I am still in the game. I am alive. I am working. I am learning. I'm parenting. I'm doing a bunch of stuff. Yes, there is stuff in my core that needs work. But my head is above the water line when it could be below the water line given my history. And so I invite people to think about things like dissociation, which are in the DSM as a pathological condition.
Mm-hmm.
And that is certainly one way to think about dissociation. But I would argue that the other way to think about dissociation and the performance of self is as an adaptive, resilient response to shame, trauma, and things that happen to human beings in the world.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense to me that it's the dissociation part and not the shame part, right? Just uh it's what you do with that shame or hidden shame
That's
as you
exactly right.
and because I was just very interested in how if it was what I thought it was, oh, how is that? How is that? Wouldn't that be
Mm,
kind of interesting? But no, this one this the way you have explained it now it makes a lot more sense to me. So thank you for clarifying that.
you are welcome.
I had two comments for the students. I was quite impressed with their capstones, but I think
Mm,
they also need a bit of feedback. On the first one, um, she was moving between self as a resilience to systemic resilience, and she didn't quite differentiate between the two. So maybe you can just go back with some comments to her to say, well, what is the distinction between self-resilience and systemic resilience? I
mm.
mean, if she still has a chance, she still has a chance to modify the capstone. If it's already gone, that's fine. Uh, the second one, I was a bit worried about some of the references. Bullying has got a lot of research, recent research, and some of the references are quite old, more than 10 years old.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think if some of the references there are not actually classic studies, I think she would probably be advised to get some more recent, references on that. Uh, Towards the end, she had some quite new research, 2019, 2020. But at the beginning, right at the beginning, I saw something like 2010, 2011, which was quite old. So those are, I mean, it's just feedback for those two students, but otherwise, very impressive.
Thank you, Dr. Carriwo. And um, with that, I just wanted to end with maybe a quick comment from each of those, Drs. Linder and Kalantar, since we're here. We started this session under the guise of resilience and well-being. Give me just a quick 1 or 2 sentence. I know it's impossible. What does well-being look like?
Mm. I have many identities, and one of them is a painter. I live in a house that is full of very, very large paintings that I did in the early years of my own trauma recovery. So what I can say, I can offer an image, which is that resilience for me, if you're thinking of the self, I like to think of the self as a bicycle wheel, and that self or soul is at the hub of the wheel, and uh, that should be, I would want that to be full of light, not darkness. I want many clients that I work with, that space in their self architecture is like a void. It's like a black hole, and the event horizon just pulls all good things into it. Whereas self compassion serves as a small sun in the center of the self, and from that center, light emerges, as does hope and resilience.
Thank you. Last word, Dr. Kalantar.
Yeah. So I would go with Levin talk about well-being, how much we can be connected to the nature. It just can be a tangible example. I would go like considering connecting to the nature. If you see my background here, it shows that in practice is how it's important to connect to the nature. Yeah, it shows the level of well-being and yeah.
Great. Thank you both, and thank you to the other presenters as well for this wonderful session here. We will reconvene at 35 minutes past the hour. We're a little early, so I give you the gift of time, and time is also, um, as I have found, a critical component to building resilience. So please enjoy your break, and we will see you back here at 35 minutes past the hour. Thank you all once again.